Radio Free Santa Clarita presents The Talk of Santa Clarita, a podcast about issues involving Santa Clarita and the surrounding valley. Episode 133, California Assemblymember for the 38th District, Christy Smith. And now, let's see what the Talk of Santa Clarita is.
And remember, this is for posterity, so be honest.
Here we go. All right, Christy Smith, welcome to the Talk of Santa.
Thanks. Good to be back, Stephen.
Yeah, this is what we call take two because the last time, this is how cool you are. Okay, I'm gonna just tell everybody that we did one back in May, and I had some sound issues with it, so it got delayed being put up, and I let you know, and I said, we figured it out, and you just came back and said, no, it's too long, it's too old now, let's do another one.
Yeah,
and,
let's do a new one.
I felt really weird about that because I know how busy you are, and you're just cool about it.
Thanks.
Kudos to you. So,
thanks, I appreciate it. Well, we've got a lot more to talk about now, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
I finished my first legislative session, and so make it a little more interesting for your listeners.
Oh, well, let's hope so. First off, we on the original podcast that we did talk a little bit about just how your life has changed. Can you just, but they didn't see that, so
right,
so,
yeah.
How tell me about how busy you become, how much your life has changed since.
Sure. Well, I mean, it's, I was always busy, but this is just, traveling to work is interesting. And so during the legislative session, which starts in January and just ended for us about a week and a half ago, I spend a fair amount of my time in Sacramento. So usually I'm going up on a Sunday night or a Monday morning and working through Thursday afternoon and sometimes Friday afternoon. And so in a full calendar year, I'm actually in Sacramento about 220 days out of the year. Yeah, it's a lot of time. But it was a great first year, have a lot of wonderful, really impressive colleagues. We accomplished a lot as a group. I'm proud of the legislative package that my team was able to push through the process and some resources we were able to bring back to the community. So worth all the long hours and hard work.
I saw I guess it was a post on Facebook about where it was like 1 a.m. in the morning. You guys were still. And you look like you just got up.
No, we were actually exhausted. So we officially ended a session. We had to suspend the rules. Typically, we're supposed to be done by midnight. But because of an incident that occurred over on the Senate side, which ended up being a crime scene investigation, we all didn't finish up our work until about 3 a.m. Because when we get to that point in the legislative session, we're kind of waiting. We have to make sure that bills have cleared both houses' processes. And so the Senate had to take a little bit of break, relocate, and so we had to wait for some things to clear their house and head back over to our desks.
Would you take a nap in your office or?
No. So we actually, when we're in session, we are sequestered to the floor.
Oh, really?
To the portion of the building where there is green carpet. And so we're behind a locked door, and there's a member lounge in there where we can have refreshments, and there's water, and there's places to sit. Then there's the assembly floor, the speaker's office, and then we have a small portico. If we wanted to get some fresh air, we can step outside, and that accommodates about a dozen people out on this portico outside the building. But other than that, we stay in that space until the work is done and until the quorum call has been lifted.
That's awesome. I mean, it guarantees the work's good.
It guarantees we're not allowed to run away.
and as far as like going up there on Mondays, is it? I was told at least that it's like every Monday morning at the Burbank Airport it's just filled with assembly members.
Yeah. There's 2 or 3 flights that we all end up on, whether it's the 7 a.m. and then depending on the time of year, Southwest has a couple of others programmed in there. And the last one that gets us there on time is at 9:50 in the morning. So.
Wow. Now, I was looking over. I just went to your website and I was looking at all the stuff that you've been doing, and then I looked through your Facebook stuff and all the postings and everything that's been going on, and I just first of all, you're a workaholic, aren't you? Are you?
I don't know if I'm a workaholic, but I'm type A, and I went to Sacramento with a vision in mind, and I really wanted to get started on it. Look, I mean, as you and I have discussed before, this is a job where the public decides whether you keep the job or not. Right. And I know I've got it for 2 years. So in those 2 years, how much of the agenda that I set forth in which the voters agreed to send me there to pursue, how much of that can I get done and really show some of those deliverables? So I just got right to work.
One of the things that was just recently up on your website was that 7 bills went to the governor's office.
Right, and we had already had several signed. I just got notice yesterday we had another one signed, and so we're waiting for his office to do the press release on that. So hopefully by the end of the process, I'll have a total of 12 with the governor's signature.
12? Mm-hmm. Stop that. Just stop it. I can't keep up. I mean, you know, is that normal for an assembly person to get 12 bills through?
You know, it depends. It depends on the type, the nature of the bills. Some of my colleagues introduced as many as 50 in this session, and I chose to develop a smaller package and just stay focused on getting them all through. So we started the process with 15. We dropped one off because we just couldn't fully form the idea in a way that kind of fit a legislative framework. Moved forward with 14. So, you know, to get to the end and have a total of 12 done is going to be, it's an accomplishment.
How do you pick what's important to I mean, like you said, you let one drop off, and I mean, you pick 12 or whatever to get through. I mean, how do you find your priorities as to what to focus on? Yeah,
well, I focused on what I promised to the voters, that I was going to focus on, and a lot of that's been helped by the committee assignments that I have. So, you know, we were focused on education. I had a bill on homeowner protection, and then it's a combination of, you know, how you get through the process of what you hear back from the committee chairs as you start to develop the legislation, folks on either side of, you know, the issue from, you know, special interest groups, third house folks up in Sacramento, who ends up weighing in, how many of them you bring to the table. And, you know, that was another thing about my approach is I have an open door policy. And one of the most, the biggest lift, the heaviest lift I had was 1507, which was a charter schools reform bill.
Right, I'm going to ask you about that in a second.
Yeah, I stayed engaged with the Charter School Association throughout the process, right? Because I think then you end up with a piece of legislation where there's more buy-in and less willingness to come back to the table next year and just try to unravel it all. So, I mean, having an open door, making sure that everybody feels included in the process, whether it's local stakeholders, big issue groups.
What do you find you have a good relationship with the other electeds? I mean, for example, do you get along with Governor Newsom pretty well, or are you? Yeah,
I mean, the governor has been great. It's never easy for a first-term governor, right? Because he's got to establish his parameters about what his policy objectives are, and have staff that are involved with. There's 120 of us legislators, right? And we all have our bill packages, and so them being able to engage in a meaningful way on every one of those policies and those issues, at the same time, you know, being responsible for state agencies and developing the budget, which is one of the, you know, the governor's kind of big overarching responsibilities to participate in that process. But yeah, the governor's office reached out. They were willing to come to the table on some of our more challenging bills, weigh in on what his perspective was, and then we were able to move forward.
Okay, and I'm just curious about, you know, Scott Wilk, you have a good relationship with him? I mean, I assume you do. I mean, for a long time.
The senator ended up with his name on one or two pieces that I authored, and then I added on the bill that he did locally, you know, for our water agencies. So yeah, I mean, generally supportive of his agenda and our ability to work together.
The two things I kind of want to hit on is first I want to talk about very specifically some of the stuff that you've done.
Yeah.
Okay, but then I want to move to a little bit more broader ideology-wise about like where California fits in with the rest of the United States and ideology and the government and role of government in general. So let's break down some of the stuff that you've recently passed. The first one I would say that from Republicans in Santa Clarita, the one I've gotten the most feedback on is the charter school thing. And when we had take one of this, we talked about it, and I found myself defending it quite a bit because you explained it to me. And I find, Joe Messina, for example, said, you really hate charter schools.
Well,
or don't like them or whatever.
I mean, look, as a former school board colleague, Joe understands that every local school district was in support of this measure because of circumstances that have unraveled right here in this valley. We are very fortunate to have an entire community with great public schools.
Right.
But that makes it the perfect kind of environment for other folks to want to come in and have a charter location that itself will be successful when that's not the original intent of the Charter Schools Act. The original intent of the Charter Schools Act was for charters driven by dynamic groups of educators, whether they were administrators from a site, teachers from a site, would get together, form a new instructional model in areas that were struggling.
Right.
where student success had not reached its full potential, right? We haven't necessarily had that need here, with the exception of some folks who find themselves at home and being comfortable at SCVI. But then again, that's been an appropriate authorization relationship where SCVI enjoys their charter from the Heart District. They stay in contact with the Heart District. They're being monitored and followed in their success and their progress. And that's how it should work. But the bill that I authored really was about school districts authorizing for a charter to operate pretty far away from where it was originally chartered. And then that doesn't lead to effective local governance and oversight on the use of taxpayer resources. And so it always kind of astounds me when conservatives who pride themselves on fiscal responsibility, effective management, and good oversight say that this was a bad bill. I mean, this is literally a good governance bill.
The big thing I hear is you don't like, I mean, I literally saw a post that said you hate charter schools and don't believe in school choice.
Yeah, well, I believe that every public school should be a good public school so parents don't have to choose. That's what I believe. Okay. And the model that exists now includes a lot of charters that parents are choosing, that are woven into the fabric of whatever that local school dynamic is that's working.
Right.
But I think there's a lot of ways for us to approach every public school being a great public school, and this ongoing conversation, this now decades-old conversation that we've had about us versus them, charters versus public, when charters are public schools, hasn't gotten us very far in shifting that paradigm to looking at how every school can be successful.
Right.
So the goal of not only my bill this cycle, but others that were authored in this space was, okay, let's put a framework in place where everybody's playing by the same set of rules. Then let's start to gather data. So this was another one of my bills, AB 967, was really aimed on how do we start to collect a common data set across the entire school system, charters and public schools alike, so that we really can compare what best practices are working and what's the most effective use in taxpayer money in supporting the 8 state priorities in education.
Right.
And so my goal is really, okay, let's fix what we know wasn't working. Let's provide a new framework, and let's figure out how we move forward beyond these old stale conversations that weren't benefiting students at all. It was just really kind of this territorial battle.
What is one of the things, if I remember correctly, you talked about that in some cases charter schools are being used more for profit purposes?
Yeah, and California had already changed that regulatory environment where they couldn't be operated by for-profit seeking entities. So now they can only be operated by nonprofit organizations.
Right.
And, we're just going to have to, I think, more carefully monitor going forward what the data is that's coming out of every public school, and focus on professional development for teachers and improving instructional strategies, and talk about appropriately placing resources where they need to go and getting California's per pupil funding back to a nationally competitive level overall. All of those things help us develop a better picture and understanding of how we can serve our students better.
Let's see, some of the other bills that was AB 543, making school sexual harassment resources accessible.
Yeah, so there's actually a really cool story behind this. So literally my very first hearing that I got to go to in Sacramento was an informational hearing in the education committee. And we had a student group come up, and they spend a week in Sacramento, and they're walked through the legislative process. And then their end product at the end of this program is to present to the respective committee that they were interested in a policy idea. And so these young people, all high school students, came before us, CA-CSA. It was a fantastic organization of really bright young people. And they presented 4 or 5 bill ideas. And I seized on this one, not only because we had just kind of tail-ended with the Me Too movement and everything that was affiliated and associated with that, but these young people their presentation was phenomenal. They had so well thought out the dynamics of how this legislation would need to move, and essentially provided testimony that every single one, and these are all kids who were in leadership positions in their respective high schools, had said, I have a friend who has experienced this. I personally have experienced this on campus, where they felt like they had been sexually harassed either by a peer or maybe, sadly, even in some cases, a staff member, and they really didn't know where to turn on campus for information on how to deal with that. And it's not, it's not a skill set most of our young people have, especially if it's their first time experiencing something like that. And so the bill was simply post in areas where these kids congregate where they go on campus to find access, who is the lead person on campus that they need to be in touch with if they feel that they've been sexually harassed. So in order to, have that bill go all the way through the process and stay engaged with those young people as they saw that, their hard work actually turned into something was really rewarding.
I bet. And a good bill, I think, is necessary.
Yeah, it is. And, it comes at a minimal cost. Really, all it requires is for schools to just, print the information, Xerox that off, and have it available to students in places where they might see it on a regular basis. So the locker rooms, the restrooms, if they've got school bulletin boards, it just needs to be added there so kids know where to go.
This AB 629 about human trafficking, I dealt with, when I worked at the homeless shelter that I worked at, I dealt with a lot of people that have been, kids that have been human trafficked. And obviously that's the big argument about the border, and the border wall is like to stop human trafficking.
Right.
Tell me about what this bill does exactly.
Yeah, well, I was really proud to be able to pick up the mantle and carry this bill. It was previously carried by my colleague Lorena Gonzalez out of San Diego and some sponsors who are behind the measure. And some victims of human trafficking over the years, if they were also a victim of violent crime at the same time that the human trafficking was happening, were able to access resources from the Victims' Compensation Fund. But it was not specifically delineated in the fund that victims who had been trafficked were, available to receive these resources. But it's so incredibly important, and it also goes to how the resources are accounted for when people apply for them. So usually, victims of violent crimes and other categories that qualify, it's based on a loss of compensation, which they can validate by having had a prior pay stub. Well, victims who have been human trafficked, of course, have been sold for their own body of work, for lack of a better term, and so they really didn't have necessarily a pay history immediately available in order for them to seek these resources. So that establishes a way for them to do that, to get some kind of resources to get back on their feet, to redirect their lives, to be made whole again. So it was incredibly important that we got this through. Governor Brown had previously vetoed it, so we're really hoping.
Why did he veto it? Do you know?
Well, because the Victims' Compensation Fund has had some financial stability problems based on the way that revenue is generated into the fund, and he just felt like he didn't want to destabilize the fund further by adding a group of victims. But to me,
that's an important cost, though. I mean, it's...
Yeah, this is important. I mean, I think we can fix the solvency issue separately, but we know that human trafficking is such not only a state problem, a national problem, a global problem now.
Sure, yeah.
We really need to have a means for these victims to seek some form of compensation.
And I think a lot of people forget about that. That they're like, we need human trafficking is horrible, or we need to stop it and everything like that. But they don't think about where the victims are when they get out of that situation. They don't even have bootstraps to pull themselves up with,
exactly. And the victims who are targeted for that, I mean, you frequently see it with, and I don't know what you experienced in the homeless shelter, but young people who had been foster youth, people who are recent immigrants to the country, people who have found themselves down on their luck and had no other alternative.
Absolutely.
So they felt, or young vulnerable women or men from unstable family circumstances. And so, and the statistics are pretty alarming in the fact that, the previous drug lords have been interviewed and said that they switched to human trafficking because whereas you could sell a drug product one time, you can sell a human over and over again. I mean, it's astounding. And so having any small measure of some resources that these folks can reach out for to try to escape those horrible circumstances was worth pursuing. So now fingers crossed that the governor signs it.
I'm literally going down the list of the 7 here. The AB 1233. Now, let me do this.
Yeah.
Let me test you a little bit because
I don't know the numbers with the names. If you give me the word description, I am. And see, I don't know if we've ever talked about my thing with math before. And kudos to the new way we're teaching math and everybody who loves math. But for some reason, I am a person who numbers don't stick in my brain as well as words do. So you could give me a number. There's a few I'm going to know the number with the name, but if you give me a couple word description, we're going to do better.
So the reason I was checking is because when I interviewed Scott Wilk, I would throw out numbers and he would just literally go, I don't know.
Yeah, right. And they are the ones that I have been like where it was more of a daily thing. The number kind of got hammered in, but if they were some, I don't.
Okay, well this is the waiving the AP exam.
So 15. That's 1507. No, not 1507. 1233. 1230. Yeah. Okay, 1233. Yeah. This is a program that's been in existence and proven to be incredibly effective. We know that our learners who are socioeconomically challenged or language challenged, if given the right tools and incentives, can rise to the level of advanced coursework. And what we don't ever want to see is a barrier like a fee to a test be the thing that keeps them from attempting that higher level of academic challenge and success. And so the program was set to sunset. And the fees would not have been reduced in upcoming cycles. And so I wanted to make sure that we extended the sunset, especially now as we see a renewed focus on ensuring kids equal access to all that kind of rigorous programming. And then again, with the work my colleague Lorena Gonzalez from San Diego, who also happens to be our appropriations chair, we initially drafted the bill where students who qualified at the income level would only pay $5 per exam, and she said, let's just go all in. Let's make sure that the exams are fully covered for them. So we passed the legislation in this session. We're going to work really, really hard. There's a coalition of us working really hard to make sure that that's funded in next year's budget.
That's great.
So that no kid is, has that barrier in place to accessing that coursework, and then being able to get college credit. And you think about that. If a student is able to pass an AP exam, that counts as college credit for them. That is a huge thousands of dollars potentially worth of savings to them if they decide to advance to college work.
And then there was AB 853, the scholar share to pay for expenses associated with college, such as rent, textbooks, expanding college affordability. So here's my beef. What about graduate school?
Yeah, that one's more challenging.
Yeah.
Most people don't typically have money set aside for grad school, right? Most families, when they're thinking about putting their kids through school, they're really funding that bachelor's degree.
But times are changing to where graduate school is necessary. A college degree is the equivalency of a high school degree at this point now.
Yeah, but if people still had money in a 529 to use for grad school, it could be applied for this purpose. But that bill was a result of conversations with our state treasurer, Fiona Ma, and feedback that she got as she was out on the campaign trail is because of that new dynamic where housing is now usually one of the most expensive pieces of a student's college education, whether it's undergrad or graduate, that we should go ahead and expand what those resources should be.
And textbooks too.
Textbooks.
I'm taking a math class right now, and I couldn't, the book, $125, which I'll use for a semester.
Right.
That's crazy. And it just, because it's like that thick.
No, exactly.
And then this was interesting to me because Marsha McLean came out and praised you for it. Was the state controller's working with the state controller's office to streamline the unclaimed property request process? Tell me about that. What is that exactly?
Yeah, so that's been a mission of our state controller Betty Yee in the time that she's been off. She's now starting her second term, and the state has millions of dollars in resource sitting in state coffers that need to be reclaimed by folks that it belongs to. So sometimes it's a bank account that maybe people forgot that they had, a payout of some kind of state agency that maybe they didn't have the appropriate address to get it to the individual it's entitled to. But this piece in particular speaks to governments, lower level municipal governments who may not realize that there are state resources waiting that rightfully belong to that state government entity. And so it allows a bypass of what has been kind of a complicated process for them getting that back. And now if the state controller's office can identify, yes, X amount of dollars should be going back to, say, City of Santa Clarita based on our research, they're just going to go ahead and cut that check and send it back.
Nice.
Kind of cut a full level of bureaucracy and get money back in the rightful hands of municipal governments who really need it right now, frankly.
Yeah, and then this is the other one I really was impressed with was AB 1106, the Enhanced Homeowners Notification Program.
Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So again, another program that was set to sunset in Los Angeles County came out of the housing crisis that was tied to the recession, where we saw mass foreclosures across the state and the country. And LA County decided to be proactive about that because, unfortunately, as in so many other bad financial circumstances, there are bad actors out there who decided they would get in this space, and there were wrongful foreclosures happening. There was foreclosure fraud where people were offering services to help homeowners when really they were no help to them at all. So this program, for every foreclosure transaction that occurs, a fee is assessed, and then it goes into a pool to have resources then that are able to help homeowners who find themselves in that unfortunate circumstance, right? So they can call this county service, have somebody walk them through the process. So it really is about providing homeowners access to what their rights are as homeowners. If foreclosure is imminent or even possible for them, they know how to protect themselves and how to proceed through the legal process without jeopardy, from unscrupulous actors.
No, that's great. And then one of the other things I also have here that you did something for transparency and science-based monitoring. What other kind of monitoring is there for Aliso Canyon? What religious-based monitoring?
Well, no, it was more about ensuring. Well, first of all, we wanted full disclosure of the contaminants from the well. That was one of the things that didn't happen right away when the well blowout first occurred, and the gas company simply wasn't required to produce that. And then in the meantime, you had thousands of people evacuating their homes, not knowing what their children, their loved ones had potentially been exposed to, which creates a really big public health problem in the respect that how do you generate a response to that if you don't know what the exposure has been, right?
Sure.
And so there's that level of transparency. And I think, looking at ongoing air quality monitoring that is substantive, consistent, and our AQMD happens to be really stretched thin right now. They're understaffed, and I think as we see more need regionally and dealing with not only that environmental concerns, but for instance, even places like the old Exide battery plant where there's still a lot of airborne contaminants, and modern monitoring really should be happening in the surrounding area. We need to really continue to invest in that, and we need to have it done in a way that is transparent so that the public has access to what they're being exposed to.
All right. Do you handle? Like toxic waste dumps or toxic waste areas? Is that's more EPA, more federal, right? Does the state get involved with it?
The state has a Department of Toxic Substances, and so right now they are the point at which the Santa Susana field lab,
for instance,
is kind of reached a standstill. So that is a bill I'm going to be working on, I think, in this upcoming legislative session with some colleagues. Similarly, Christina Garcia, who's Exide, is actually in her district. We want to see the DTSC functioning much more efficiently on the public's behalf.
Okay.
And in protecting public health and ensuring that some of these sites that have been designated as cleanup sites are actually being not only cleaned up, but in the time that that's happening, the public is being protected, and any exposures that have occurred really are being reported to people so they know what they're dealing with.
We were talking about that. Someone was telling me about Santa Susana, and it just, the amount of toxicity there, to me, it was just flat out scary.
Yeah.
And the fact that it's still a mess, apparently, that it hasn't been cleaned up yet.
Right.
And Whitaker Burmite, are you involved?
Well,
involved
I've taken a couple of tours out at Whitaker Burmite, and that is one example of a very successful cleanup. And the contaminants that have been present on Whitaker Burmite are responsive to bioactive treatment, which is working very successfully there.
This is where they actually use like bugs or whatever that actually or different things.
Microbes, right?
Yeah,
they move the contaminated soil. They're able to put it under tarps and create the right kind of like greenhouse conditions, for lack of a better explanation. And so kind of nature is taking care of itself there. There's digestive enzymes, and that's working to clean that up, along with some vaporization techniques that are pulling additional contaminants out of the soil. Unfortunately, at Santa Susana, there are multiple types of contaminants, many of which are radioactive and are non-responsive to that kind of cleanup. And so then, you have multiple challenges. First of all, how do you do that in a way where you're not creating greater risk by contaminants that have been in the ground for a while and stirring that up and creating airborne contaminants. And then once you're able to get to the point where you're talking about extracting that, because we've built the community around Santa Susana over the years, right? The idea that trucks would be going in and out, or whatever the form of conveyance is to get these materials out of the community, creates additional community exposure. So what does that model look like for cleaning it up, first of all? And then second of all, to what level do you restore the land to make it, usable, arable space?
Is it even possible to do?
And is it even possible to do, right? And so that's the point that we're at now. You're never going to see Santa Susana be a place where there's going to be real estate development, but to what level do we clean it? And then the other conversation that we need to have on a national level is, we clean this stuff up from a local level, but then where does it go?
Yeah.
Right. There's some big lead-lined hole in the ground somewhere where a lot of this stuff is going.
What is it? What is the name of the place? place up in Nevada where do you know? I remember
Yeah,
that. I can't remember the name of it, but
Right.
that was going to store all radioactive waste. But even then, when you talk about like transportation, they were talking about
Right.
the problem with, what if it's taken by train? What if that train derails?
Right.
Or a truck wrecks
Exactly.
and it's transporting it to that location, and eventually it's going to fill up anyway. But
so I think that's a matter of being much more thoughtful on a going forward basis about what we're exposing our surroundings to
Right.
as we develop new technologies that are going to require significant cleanup at some point in the future.
do you think Whitaker Burmite's going to be safe for development at any point, or?
I think it'll be ready probably for commercial development, the phases of it that were planned to be able to sustain that. Yeah. I mean, I have every bit of confidence, like I said, having been up there a couple of times and spoken with the professionals, taken the tour. They've been very deliberate. And the local city here, City of Santa Clarita, has been really diligent about that monitoring and making sure that property is restored to a use that suits the level of cleanup that's happened.
I want to ask you about this. This caught my attention because I hadn't been paying attention to the bill, but you felt, and it was SB 276, I believe it was about vaccinations, and you felt that you voted for it. Is that right? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. And you basically said that the decision was not an easy one. Tell us about the bill itself and why the struggle. What was the issue there?
Yeah, well, SB 276 was a follow-up piece of legislation to a bill that Senator Pan had authored years prior, changing the exemption status for childhood immunization.
How so? How would it change it?
This would say that, we used to have personal belief exemptions, and Dr. Pan's prior bill took away personal belief exemptions and said, really, we should only be exempting children for medical reasons. And subsequent to that, we saw then a lot of medical exemptions. I mean, like a skyrocketing number of medical exemptions happening. And then, as we saw recently, you started to see outbreaks of preventable illnesses again, like measles.
Yeah.
And so it became a public health risk significantly, and particularly for our public schools, which frankly aren't equipped to be the front line of public health crises for a number of obvious reasons. The reason it was challenging, though, as I heard from so many parents and families, and I will fully say
anti-vaxxers?
Well, yes, but I'm not a medical expert, but I am a parent. And so I was not insensitive to the fact that when families were coming to me and they really felt like whatever their child was suffering from was caused by a vaccine that they had received at whatever point in their development, right? And I'm not going to weigh in on whether that was a valid concern or not concern. That's what those families were living with at that point. And so for me, the first round of the bill of 276, I felt like didn't go far enough in empowering those parents in what the appeal process would be. So the bill as it exists now, any pediatrician, any physician who deals with children or anyone receiving a vaccine, frankly, can write up to 5 medical exemptions a year without there being a trigger. And according to the California Medical Association, that seemed pretty reasonable because they felt like the legitimate percentage of folks who really do qualify for a medical exemption is around 1%, give or take. So the CMA was comfortable with that number. And then above 5, there's 2 triggers, either for any individual physician above 5 exemptions, or for a school district school district that's not at that herd immunity level. There would be then reviews of the exemptions that had happened by those physicians in that community. And that review, though, is done by another panel of medical doctors, right? It's not bureaucrats at Department of Public Health. These are actually other doctors. But what I wanted to ensure was happening, and is now written into the law, is that the families who are seeking that appeal in that process are able to bring whatever data and documentation and prior workup that's been done on their child to this process to try to influence that process and have a rational discussion about whether or not the exemption should be granted or not granted. And during that time, during the time of the appeal, the child's exemption is still in place. So they're still able to go to school.
So, I mean, you believe in the mandatory vaccine concept, do you?
Look, both of my kids are fully vaccinated.
Okay, but I mean, here's where I'll shock some of my friends that are progressives, or even the conservatives that say, "Oh, you're a progressive."
Yeah, well, it's actually really a bipartisan. It was a cross-spectrum issue.
I have kind of that libertarian kind of thing about I support vaccination. My kid's vaccinated.
Right.
What I have issue with is the idea that the state mandates vaccinations, because it's not like a school uniform. You know, it's
Right.
like, you know, they go home and take it off. You put a vaccination in
we
somebody.
We also mandate car seats, and we mandate seat belts.
Yeah, but I can get out of the car, or I can take the seatbelt off. You put a vaccine in me, you can't take it out. You know, that's my issue with that. You know, and my concern about it. It's like, yes, measles vaccines are good. You know, chickenpox vaccines are good.
Yeah.
But 10 years down the road, they'll say, hey, we got this vaccine that takes care of cancer, and then you know, hey, I've seen, you know, that Will Smith movie. You know, I know where that goes.
Yeah.
But
I haven't seen that one.
they all turn into vampires.
Okay. Well.
So, which, by the way, the whole thing about the microbes eating in winter curbamite, that just screams horror movie at some point.
Right, see things crawl out of the mutants.
Exactly. But no, so I mean, I'm wondering where you stand on that, because it does seem to it concerns me a little bit about the idea of a mandatory vaccine situation. I understand about public health. But, you know.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's the protection of public health. And again, I think you and I come from a generation where we didn't see huge numbers of people suffering from smallpox or polio, right? And that's, you know, I've still got the scar in my arm today that kept me from getting smallpox, right? And so I think, you know, sometimes when you're in a generation that's kind of absent whatever that earlier context was, it's easier to distance yourself from the crisis and the necessity of doing it. But the other thing I will say to that point, and continuing being sympathetic with the families who did have concerns, I think in California, if we see a lot of these appeals and the Department of Public Health and the physicians who are reviewing these cases seeing patterns, consistent patterns and presentations, I think that's going to be data that is really, really difficult to ignore. And we had one or two unfortunate bad researchers in this space, the gentleman who tried to link vaccines to autism prior and now has been largely discredited, and found out, you know, his real interest was in developing a competing vaccine, and that's why he came out with the study as he did. But we do owe it to these parents and these families whose children have, you know, suffered health consequences for whatever reason, to aggregate as much data as we can to help them going forward. And I think this kind of process allows that. I just wanted to make sure that parents' rights were also protected in that process, that their child maintains their exemption as they go through the process. They have opportunities to seek out other physicians for other information, and that we really get to best decisions. And I understand this is going to put some families right now in a tough spot. I know some folks are probably, you know, considering homeschool options or other things, and some in that community have done that already. But I had to weigh the overall benefit of public health and my responsibility to public health based on scientific data that I felt was more compelling, as well as a process that allowed these parents with these concerns to participate.
And that's something I really admire about you, is that you do, I mean, your decisions are based on science and really evaluating both sides of I mean, people, you're a Democrat, but you do look at the data from both sides and everything, and before you make a decision.
I mean, and I can give you an example that, you know, I pretty strongly went up against my party because I didn't think the economic data and evidence was there to support the rent caps bill that just happened, 1482, you know, and that was a bill where from the outset I was able to argue both an incredibly conservative principled stand on that from a private property perspective, as well as what I find to be, you know, puts me in line with more progressive folks, because rent control simply hasn't worked, and it has more significantly marginalized the currently unhoused and homeless more than anything else.
How so? I mean,
housing space. Because what happens is it shifts the market. So when rent control is put in place, and this has been proven by studies of Brookings Institution, Stanford, I mean, Krugman, who is an economist that a lot of us on the left kind of look to as our North Star for many analyses, he also finds rent control to be problematic, but it alters the market in a way where people who are currently owners and rent out their properties typically will just remove themselves from the market. They feel like that they're not able to capture full market potential, and they change and they end up selling condos, you know, to condos or convert their properties in some other way, which takes more housing off the market. And what we've done right now at a time in California where we need housing growth is we have disincentivized the market for exactly the kind of development we need, which is large-scale multifamily housing in urban and transit-rich areas. We have made that less appealing. Now, granted, there's a 10-year carve-out for those folks, and anything that gets built in that time is exempted. But overall, economic study after economic study have said that rent controls and rent caps don't work. what we really have is a supply problem. And so how we go about that, whether that's more government programming in terms of HUD available housing, tax credit programs that we could have entered into to incentivize landlords to keep rents at a certain rate. I just think controlling the market in the way that we did is actually going to exacerbate the problem and make it worse. I hope I'm not right, but I fear that I might be, because I've talked to so many developers who find themselves leaving the state for a number of reasons. I mean, that's not the only reason, but now we've just added this extra layer of complication.
Yeah. Well, all I know is I wouldn't have been able to live in Hollywood for 12 years if there hadn't been rent control. I mean, they were dying for me to move out when I finally did.
And that's the other part of it. So what you find too in communities where rent control is in place is that people who probably could or should move, whether they needed to downsize, it was time for them to downsize in their life, or they wanted to take another opportunity for a job or something, they don't move because they want to hold on to that rent controlled property. And it doesn't allow, again, the least among us who have the least access to housing right now to get into a property that they can afford.
Okay. I mean, just one of the things that I find it interesting about just like the complaints that a lot of people on the right have about California in general. And usually, the irony I find is that they also have the attitude of America, love it or leave it, but it apparently doesn't apply to the state. But the argument is that right now, because we have a Democratic majority in the state government, that we're running the state, or they claim that it is. First off, I see them claiming all the time that we don't have a balanced budget, or we don't have a surplus.
We're constitutionally required to have a balanced budget. We also have the most substantially funded rainy day fund now than we've ever had in the state's history, and that includes during Republican administrations and Republican legislatures.
Okay, well, see, because I hear them screaming, "Oh, there's a deficit." It's they're running the, and then they talk about it being too expensive to live out here. And the homeless issue itself, that it's an example of the failure of the Democratic Party and Democratic government. How do you respond to something like that?
Well, I mean, homelessness issue is a multifaceted problem, and you and I could probably do an entire podcast on it, but it boils down to a few essential elements. First of all, income inequality in the country based on the fact that we have not driven our economy in a way that is meaningful for middle income earners and opportunities for middle income earning. Second of all, in California, we have a supply problem. As I've just said, we have not built enough housing. We are 3 million units of housing short in California. Then we have an incarceration and rehabilitation problem where people are in and out of our criminal justice system but never engage in any meaningful ways to get themselves out of a pattern of what becomes a revolving door criminal justice system. And then finally, mental health and drug abuse that we don't treat systemically here in the state. All of those things are contributing to our current homelessness problem. And so where a person falls in there depends on their entire life circumstance, their economic circumstance, and so forth.
But I mean, is that the fault of the Democrats themselves, or the Democratic government for not the housing situation?
No, because homelessness occurs under Republican administration.
Well, I know that, but it has increased.
Because I think the economic recovery that we have all experienced since the recession has not hit everybody equally, and the fact that our healthcare system has not kept pace to acknowledge that for the massive drug problem nationwide, opioid epidemic has driven a big portion of that, as well as access to mental health, huge part of it. Huge part of it. So it is a multifaceted systemic problem. And look, I really don't mind working with my Republican colleagues, but what I want to say is, then what are your solutions? Please come to the table with a solution for me, because you can lob the ball back across the table all you want to. You want to come and sit and talk solutions with me? Well, let's do that all day.
Well, what do you think about Trump's idea that he's just going to have them bust out? That's what I heard.
To where and to what end? I mean, they could probably be housed, and then I think there's a whole, since he's a real estate developer, issue we can talk about there with who ends up housing them. But bust them where and to what end? But part of the humanitarian aspect of this is that when you have people who are in significant mental health crises, and all the data indicates that once a person becomes homeless, if they were already suffering mental health, that becomes daily compounded, right? That they become withdrawn from society, their norms and behaviors change dramatically and quickly. There's a whole set of circumstances of dealing with the human being as a person that we need to get to. Equally as important as putting a roof over their head and making sure they have access to something to eat.
Catherine Barger is right now fighting the court ruling about the right to sleep on the street. How do you feel about that?
I'm in support of the supervisor on this one. Her point is we have to connect people with services.
Okay, but I mean,
she has aggressively moved in that direction. And the county has done a lot to provide opportunities for people to get off the street.
Right.
But I think part of the dynamic has to be altering people's circumstance to compel them sometimes to engage with services that they need.
So I mean, I don't know about that. I mean, when I talked to Catherine, she talked about wanting to take care of the homeless crisis, but I don't know if compelling people or making it illegal for them to sleep on the streets is a solution in any way. I mean, I don't see how that helps things. And getting down to the kind of basic rights, if it's a public place or public area, don't I have the right to sit there or stand there or sleep there if I want?
Yeah, I mean, no, look, it's not easy. I just, what I'm saying is I understand why she's doing what she's doing, because she's also a representative who at the same time is fighting on a consistent basis to open more psychiatric beds in our county hospitals, and to, she started the system where mental health providers are now going to be going out in teams, in vans, right, to be able to help people. And at some point, where do we draw the line and say, for the public's health interest, for the public's safety, can we compel people? And it takes us really back to that debate where we used to have state mental health facilities, and our whole logic and argument around abandoning those, right, was should we be compelling folks to be in that environment for their own safety, for the public safety. It's a tough.
I know there's no easy answer to it.
There's no easy answer.
I was curious what your thoughts on that were.
I mean, our city here has made that decision. The county continues to grapple with it, and the county really that's the point of service where our state resources are being pushed out, is at the county level. And I just, I'm loath to be critical of our supervisor because I know what she's doing. I know how important this issue is to her and how hard she's pushed on it.
Okay. I'm also curious about, is it Prop 13, the property tax? I think, where do you stand on that right now? I mean, it seems, I certainly benefit from it on a certain level, but on the other end of it,
I think there's two things that are being conflated. There is Prop 13, which is the homeowner protection. So for those of us who own a home and are paying property taxes, we have that guaranteed protection that rates will rise at a very slow incremental pace. The other part of the conversation is what becomes of what will be on our ballots as a split roll, which is to assess and reassess commercial properties in the same manner that residential properties are assessed. My overarching concern, is that the bulk of California's employers are small businesses, and the pass-through for that increase in taxes is going to be carried by them, and the burden's going to be carried by them. And I think you're going to see employment opportunities shrink if a small business owner has to decide between having a part-time employee and paying an increase in their tax to their landlord, which is a pass-through, in order to cover split roll. What I will say, though, is that on the other side of the split roll conversation, and you're seeing it presented publicly in other ways, but the folks behind that are largely educational leaders. It's a coalition of folks either in education, public safety, public services, who see a need for funding, and rightly so. And as we talked about earlier in our conversation, we are not at a nationally competitive per pupil spending level, and they see this as a means of having funds in a way that they say is balanced and equitable with what homeowner protections are, just passing it on to business, but also having more revenue in the state's general fund in order to be able to support education and build the economy. It is absolutely a really tough conversation for us to have right now, but I want to make sure that folks aren't conflating the two. As of right now, people's Prop 13, residential Prop 13 protections are not what we're talking about. We're talking about corporate property.
Are businesses leaving? Are businesses leaving California?
Yes and no. I mean, we've had more net in than outgoing. But yeah, I mean, they leave, and other places, will incentivize recruiting businesses out of California. And we do need to be careful about that. We do need to be careful about the regulatory environment that we create here, because my fear is that we've become, we still have a lot of manufacturing here. We're very fortunate to have tech. We're very fortunate to have a great university system. But we have also, a lot of our job growth and development has been in service sector industries. And those are typically not high-skilled, high-paying jobs and aren't allowing people to, really support themselves.
One of the other things, it seemed like when I first moved to California, one of the biggest problems was the budget. Now, the budget they passed a bill, correct me if I'm wrong, years ago, about being a 2/3 majority to pass the budget. And for years, it's like they would just fight, and it seemed like the budget would never get passed and everything like that. Now it is getting passed because you have a supermajority there. Should that be the case? I mean, it seems like there's a danger if the supermajority for the Democrats changes or disappears. You're going to end up with a lot of squabbling and fighting again.
Well, I mean, and I think the better person to ask about that would be Cameron Smythe, because he lived through it when he served the community. It is a thoughtful process, though, I can tell you. I mean, having gone through it once now and seeing the work of the subcommittees and then what our role is as an individual member of the legislative body, it is a very thorough vetting of the state's resources. And it's everybody who has a stake in that coming to the table and trying to get their share of the resources when there's extra. And then, unfortunately, in lean years, having to talk about what cuts they're able to take and still sustain services. So I think, I don't know if it would change with the times. I don't know if the legislative body ever went back to kind of a more 50-50 balance, or even if we saw, the evolution of another successful third party here in California, how that would change the dynamic. But, from the minority party, they are vice chairs on every single budget subcommittee, as well as the main budget committee, and certainly have opportunities to weigh in the process. And did so on the floor.
It just seems to me like, there's an advantage right now because of the supermajority for a Democrat to get things done. Newsom and Brown have both been in positions to do something. Schwarzenegger, say what you will about him, good or bad, dealt with, and his predecessor, Gray Davis and whoever it was before, I forget. They dealt with a situation where they couldn't get anything done because of that. In the same sense that, like, the filibuster in the Senate requires 60 votes. And it just seems like it's rigged to cause problems. You know what I mean?
I don't know. I will always be one in favor of, I think there's a lot to be said for a righteous opposition and the ability for that opposition to have some influence in the process, right? And I think that's important. But I think the other things that a lot of folks don't think about when it comes to the California budget is that a lot of our budget is already locked in. So there's the Prop 98 guarantee, which guarantees about half our state's budget goes to our public schools. Our criminal justice and our incarceration system is another big chunk. Services to individuals who need health support services in their home. A lot of the budget is already locked in, and California is one of those states also where we can literally ballot from the budget box, and voters have weighed in and influenced that budget process in ways that sometimes also tie the legislators' hands, for better or for worse, right? So we have a pretty complex dynamic when it comes to how our state's budget unfolds. But again, I feel I am more assured now, having been there for a year, that is a transparent process. Some folks locally would disagree with that, but at any point in the process, people can attend a budget subcommittee hearing or a budget committee hearing and know what's going on and be in contact with their legislator about what their local priorities are. So,
one of the things the federal government is kind of known for right now is the partisanship and how bad it is. Is it like that in the state right now? I mean, do you find that the right is just refusing to work with the left at all, or no, not at all?
No. No, and I there are a couple of members I have tremendous respect for, who I had great conversations with. We serve on committees together, and people wanting to do good work, from the Republican side of the aisle, and they know, just based on their numbers, that means that they've got to find those of us with similar viewpoints or similar priorities, and be able to work with us. And no, I haven't really found that to be the case.
Okay, and I want to ask you more on a philosophical level. States' rights. I mean, first of all, you're on the.
Yeah, we're in a test market for that now, aren't we?
We are, aren't we? I don't know how the Attorney General's filed how many 50 lawsuits against the federal government. But I mean, you're on the Joint Legislative Committee on Emergency Management, and has Trump affected the funding for fires and stuff like that? It's my understanding part of the money that he was trying to allocate to building the wall was possibly going to come from federal funding for fighting fires.
As of now, we haven't experienced that loss. We were concerned early on when he came out and told us we needed to rake more. We thought that there might be some loss of funds, but subsequently they stepped up, and funds are proceeding on time as they were intended to. And I think what a lot of people don't realize too is that a lot of the forest land in California that has not been maintained is federal land, right? This isn't state land. So I think if we're talking about folks showing up with rakes,
Trump can.
Yeah, but we're doing what we can, and so the governor's response to that, with taking the federal resources that we knew we were entitled to, and that have either come or are now on the way. For lack of a better term, a heat map in California was created, and we looked at the most pressing areas of need, and that's where resources are being allocated right now in terms of forestry cleanup and wildfire mitigation. And then being chair of that committee has been a privilege beyond what I could have expected. Our state's first responder community, our firefighters, how they marshal their manpower, woman power, equipment, what they are able to do, how thoughtful they are in their process about protecting Californians is phenomenal and impressive, and they deserve every bit of congratulations and thanks that they all get when we have a fire, and folks from around the community are showering them with food and water. Boy, do they deserve it. They invest so much effort in keeping us safe at the times when we're not thinking about it, right? It's when the fires aren't happening that they're doing a lot of great work.
Yeah.
And then of course when they put their lives on the line for us. But the state's Office of Emergency Services, along with the governor's office, I think really focused our resources and targeted them in the best possible way right now. And then unfortunately what we learned out of Ridgecrest is that we got to take another look at earthquake safety, right? A lot of us have forgotten about that. We probably don't have our earthquake kits up to date. Or
my wife's on my case about it all the time.
Local evacuation plans, right? And so I think one of the bigger concerns is what would happen if we were to have kind of an earthquake and a wildfire disaster at the same time.
Oh God,
really taxing those resources. So we're going to continue to push to take the lead from our first responder community, like I said, who does a phenomenal job, make sure that they're fully empowered and equipped to do what they need to do, and then help homeowners and help communities to have the tools at their disposal to protect themselves. And so whether that's building materials, brush clearance, that kind of thing, we're working on all of that.
I'm just curious, has Trump's philosophy and budgeting and everything like that, has it affected the state directly? And I guess, right now the issue is he's trying to stop the regulation of carbon emissions from
clean fuel standards.
Clean fuel standards.
Yeah. Look, California has and will continue to be an environmental leader in the country. It is a priority not only of the legislature, but of the people who live here.
Right.
We have our coastal communities that rely on a beautiful coastline for our travel and tourism industry. We have the Central Valley, which is the breadbasket of the country, and we have farmers and agricultural providers who depend on clean water and clean air to be able to grow a good product that we sell here in the country and across the world, right? So California's economy depends on a clean environment. Beyond that, it's look, you've got the big four automakers all saying we've invested billions of dollars in researching and developing clean fuel standards, and now you want us to roll that back from a business perspective. And he's a businessman, right? So from a business perspective, that doesn't make sense. These auto manufacturers have already invested in the technology. They know it pays dividends not only in the market from consumers who want that kind of product, but then in our ability to fight climate change and be dealing with what is a very, very expensive global cleanup effort later if we don't continue on this path of having these air standards. So, in terms of a viable policy, I wish him well, but I think when you've got states as well as the big four auto manufacturers saying we don't think this is the best idea,
where does, again, it's like the issue with immigration, and what was the bill that De Leon passed, SB
54.
It could be argued that the Constitution rules that the federal government is in charge of immigration. And
that's exactly what SB 54 delineated. And I think we didn't have a robust enough conversation about that. But really, what SB 54 said is that we're not going to use state resources in support of what is a federal responsibility.
Okay.
And I think there are a lot of legislators on both sides of the aisle who would agree that it's been the federal government's just complete abdication of dealing with this issue across numerous administrations and through numerous sessions of Congress that we haven't seen any action on making immigration work here in the states. And so SB 54 was really about that. Like, we're not going to be deputizing or using what are local resources to keep our communities safe, and communities of national diversity that rely on having a good relationship with their local law enforcement to have thriving communities. We're not going to remove those folks and put them in a role where they're enforcing federal policy. And we're also not preventing federal policy from progressing as it is allowed to through our criminal justice system and through our court system. But that's very clearly delineated how that needs to work and still exists.
What do you say to the detractors about that complain about the Democratic government out here? In California and what it's doing and things. What would you say to somebody?
I understand that it's a perspective. However, the registration in the state of California is what sustains these folks getting elected. And so I think the notion that somehow we have this corrupted system of elections where we're somehow all erroneously being placed in these positions, it's really because our districts, our local communities are making those decisions that's where their values align. That's the kind of future they want to see. And like I said, I fully believe that there is absolute certain value to oppositional government and to a two-party system. But I also want to see folks coming to the table with solutions. And back when I was a Republican, I think we saw a lot more of that, And again, more than happy to speak with colleagues who want to talk about solving problems. But if it's just a matter of you're going to aim perceptions our way, which may or may not be evidence-based, and it's about complaints, that's not a conversation I can engage in, I don't even know, for the most part, how to respond for that, other than to correct when it's not evidence-based.
I have always, while my ideals are pretty obvious on the show, but I've always felt that if you're going to get anything done, so everybody has to accept the fact that nobody's going to walk away completely happy in any kind of decision made. You've got to give on both sides, and or nothing will ever get done. If you hold to your values so much, it's the same thing with like a candidate. If there is no such thing as the ideal candidate. You have to accept the fact that there are things that you're not going to agree with.
And I think the fundamental question for anybody who's in elected office always should be, how do we do the greatest amount of good for the greatest number of people with the resources we have?
The metric, as you've told me before. So, what can you just? We're going to wrap up very shortly here, but I do want to know. I think a lot of people would say, what have you done specifically for the district itself? What do you think you've done for the district and Santa Clarita in general?
So this is something I'm excited about, because as soon as I started with my team, I met with every local elected official at the city government. I've met with Catherine Barger, our county supervisor, did the same in Simi and the portions of San Fernando Valley that I represent, and really started to gather what those local priorities are. Obviously here in Santa Clarita, we've got a lot of transportation priorities, and so I got to work right away on those. We had some pretty specific asks that I am still trying to push into the transportation funding process. The Vista Canyon Metro Station, improvement of the old road, both of the phases that are currently planned for development, because that's going to be essential as we start to build on the west side of the 5. We need that support infrastructure from the old road being rehabilitated. So getting to work on those right away, getting that in process, and then through the immediate budget process that I was able to capture out of this last year's budget, prioritizing programming that was already in place that needed a little extra push to keep going. So I was really proud to bring back $450,000 to support our Santa Clarita Senior Center.
Nice.
We're going to be celebrating that really soon. The local constituency, both the nonprofit affiliated with the senior center, the city government, everybody that stepped up to the plate to move our seniors into that beautiful new facility, to expand their services, to expand opportunities for meals to be provided and meals to be delivered. That was something that, I wanted to ensure that they had that financial stability to keep that going, because so many local folks have worked so hard on that for so many years. And then similarly in Simi Valley, they operate a free health clinic there that was about to move into a much bigger facility to be able to expand their services. The city had stepped up to the plate, the county of Ventura County had stepped up to the plate, and so bringing an additional $700,000 of resources for them to be able to go ahead and make that transition was really important. We also worked on with my neighboring member Jackie Irwin, Cal State Channel Islands, which a lot of our local students attend, expanding their early childhood training program there, and some research there on that campus. A few other smaller things that we're proud of, but I think in this next budget session, again, we're going to go out to the local community. We're going to talk about what priorities are. CME has already mentioned to me they'd like to see ADA compliant playgrounds for their children in the community. So that's something we'll look at along with other things. And like I said, keeping transportation on the front burner for the whole community, because it's so important to what we do here.
What about just in general? I mean, has there been any thought about, a lot of people, I remember seeing on Facebook a lot when the people were filing their taxes, the complaint that they were actually paying more instead of getting refunds. Based on the new Trump arrangement has there been any thought? You just said that. You said that the we're pretty financially sound. What about compensating or making a difference and giving a tax cut to Californians to kind of make up for the difference that the Trump tax cut didn't do for us? You know what I mean? Is that a crazy idea? I don't know if it is or not.
I would say it's not a crazy idea, because I don't think there's ever any amount of tax relief that wouldn't be welcomed by folks, right? But I also know that we're tasked in California with running a nation-sized government and all the services that go along with that on the budget that we have. And so talking about tax cuts and how to best structure them is difficult. There was a pretty sizable, though, for working class families tax reduction in this last budget package. And so the EITC, the earned income tax credit, was expanded pretty significantly and captures a lot more folks now who will be seeing more of that money back in their paycheck. So I think we'll continue to look at it incrementally in each session. We were glad to be able to expand it a little bit this time, but I think being cognizant of continuing to protect residential property taxes is important, and then looking at other things that are cost savings to people, so making sure that we get some kind of more expense controls in our healthcare system, right? Because everybody's healthcare premiums go up every year, and we've got to bring costs down in order to ensure that doesn't happen. Try to get more people on Covered California who aren't currently in the system, because that brings costs down for everybody. So we will continue to look at ways to save Californians money that may not always necessarily be a direct tax cut, but if we can help make their healthcare more affordable, make it more affordable for their kids to go to college, those are all the kinds of things that are, of course, on the table every time. And tax cuts when and if it's manageable. Do you find it kind of frustrating? Like when Katie comes in here, there's the national news, and I can sit down and watch CNN, Fox, and MSNBC for 20 minutes each, and kind of know what to do with questions and stuff like that. State government in general, I don't think it's just me. I hope not, but or maybe it should be. But it's hard to know everything that's happening, and it doesn't get the headlines that
that what's going on federally. Do you find it frustrating getting the message out about what you are accomplishing? Because it seems like you're doing an amazing amount of work.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that. Thank you. And I will say kudos to them, but our local media outlets, when we put out a press release about what's going on and what we've done, they cover it.
Yeah.
Which has been great. And so I think anybody who follows the signal digitally or picks up the signal, SCV News, KHTS, they really do, they push the information out. And I would say that's true for myself. I've seen it with Senator Wilk and Assemblymember Lackey as well. They cover what we've got going on. But it is interesting, and I having been a school board member, and you could probably talk to any of our city council members or our local school board members, the frustration that it is hard to convey to the public exactly that is the point where really their tax dollars are being spent, right? It's right here in their own backyard, and how much of a significant influence they can have in that process by being engaged in government at the local and state level is really compelling. But on the other hand, and you experience it when you got Katie here, everybody likes the big show. Everybody likes to talk about the federal stuff.
Particularly with what's going on, it's like you want to say, why isn't this happening? And
the absolute gridlock, and it's been interesting. I mean, so I went from a body, there's this amazing statistic we would talk about at our annual school board convention, where between 70 and 80% feel like their most trusted elected official is somebody very local to them, whether it's our city council member or their school board member. And then the further up, the legislative process you go, the less inclined you are to be trusted as an elected representative. But that really just makes it incumbent on us to take advantage of opportunities like you've always provided for us, like to be here and to have these conversations.
But I mean, a lot of that I give kudos to you, because you've always made yourself available.
Because it's important. I mean, it's important for people to hear from their elected representatives. And so that was one of the other things we did early on. I had, a series of local coffees and town halls to weigh in with people. And now we're about to get started. We're embarking on a series of advisory committees that are going to help me form my legislative framework for the next session. And so bringing in community members and experts across a range of fields to help inform what we're going to do. So just being as open and transparent as we can, and really allowing people that buy-in in their government. I mean, this is their money, this is their process, and so equipping people with the opportunities to own that is really important to me.
Are you? Campaign has already started now.
Campaign has started.
Do you find that frustrating in the sense that you've been there a year and you're already having to start campaigning again?
Honestly, I do.
Really?
Yeah, no, because I like the job so much. I really enjoy the work, both the community aspect and the legislative aspect. And, as I say to people all the time, it's the dog and pony show part that I could do without.
This is the dog and pony
show. the campaigning is the part of it that it's a necessary evil, if you will, and it's...
Actually, now your opponent, when Suzette Martinez Valadares was here and she was running for Congress, talked about for Congress the idea that maybe it should be a 3-year term. And I don't think it's a bad idea, actually, because it would give you a year to 2 years to activate before you had actually. Maybe that would be something that could be considered for the Assembly.
Yeah, well, it would be a change to the Constitution, obviously, and then what do we do correspondingly to the Senate terms. But it just, because like we started out with, I knew I had 2 years, so I had to hit the ground running. I didn't have time to do this kind of slow ramp up. It's like, okay, teach me everything I need to know. And let's.
But you're a wonk anyway. I'm
a wonk anyway. So that transition wasn't quite as challenging for me, but this is the other quandary we have here, and that is I think the public gets election weary, right?
Sure.
Especially in states like ours where we've got a ballot. I mean, our last voter information pamphlet was 117 pages.
That's
right.
Insane,
and so for somebody to have to process and digest that, and what ends up being every 18 months, given that we've moved the primary. It's a lot for voters, and people have other things going on, right? They've got jobs and kids and other responsibilities, and so maybe pacing that out in a way that makes more sense and gives voters a bigger ramp up, a longer opportunity to participate. And that's what I love about how we're changing our voting systems this time, right? It gives a longer window of people to participate in the process and engage and come and vote than we've ever done before. But we need to talk about empowering voters in a meaningful way that really allows them that access.
Okay. Tell me why people should vote for you again, real quick, in 30 seconds.
I want people to vote for me because I've delivered on what I promised, because I am transparent I have an open door policy. Even if you don't agree with something that I'm doing or vice versa, let's have a conversation about it. I'm dedicated. My first commitment is to the service and to the people of the 38th District. I'll work hard. I hope I've demonstrated I'll work hard. I will spend every moment that I can advocating for good public policy that, as we talked about, does the most amount of good for the greatest amount of people with a responsible use of taxpayer resources.
Okay, we're going to do the lightning round now. You ready?
Yeah.
The fun stuff.
Okay.
Okay. Here's a question you're going to hate.
Okay.
Because it really has nothing to do with your job specifically.
Okay.
To impeach or not to impeach?
Sorry, I know you said lightning round, and I'm really being slow and deliberate about it.
That's almost mean to put you in the spot.
No,
with that one,
you know what? We got an election coming up. Let's have an election.
Okay. All right. I have a suggestion for a tattoo for you, because last time I talked to you, you said you would not get a tattoo.
No, probably not.
Well, I was thinking about probably what you looked like as a kid.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about, do you remember little Cindy Lou from The Grinch?
Yeah. Yeah, we actually have a photo of me that my mom took in one of those photo booths where I've got the little ponytail. So that actually might work.
Maybe, that might be a good tattoo for you. Let's see. The other thing was I want to get an evil laugh from you this time.
Oh, can I? Yeah.
Okay.
It's got a whole thing now.
Okay.
I'll get you, my pretty, and your little dog, too.
That is awesome. That is awesome. Well done.
That's the only impression.
But it's a pretty good one. That's a pretty good one.
That's going to be screen grabbed by some opponent at some point in the future, I'm sure.
Probably so. Probably so. And do you have a joke for us?
I don't, and I meant to be prepared today, and I had such a busy week. I am so sorry to let you down, Stephen.
Can you tell me about, just real quick, I forgot about this. I wanted to ask you about this. What was your favorite band in the 80s?
My favorite band in the 80s?
Yeah.
I got to go with Depeche Mode.
Really?
Yeah.
You and Cameron Smythe both for that.
Oh, really? Cameron for Depeche Mode too? Okay,
Well, not shut up about it.
Yeah, I mean...
Every time I talk to him, he goes, "You remember that Rose Bowl show with Depeche Mode? And we got down on the floor and..." It's my horrible Cameron Smythe impression.
Yeah.
So,
no, but I had really eclectic music taste in the 80s. I liked everything from, Depeche Mode to the hair bands to, whatever. So it was a great era for music.
Were you more a punk or a new wave kind of person? Or
I did the whole evolution.
Well,
I had the shaved head.
I'm very intrigued with that. I really want to see a picture of that.
I'm telling you, my mom wouldn't take pictures. She just didn't want to acknowledge that it was happening. You talk about it across the spectrum with music. The 80s was a really unique time for music because because MTV was playing every different genre. Everything, right? We still had disco and we had the more new wave stuff. Yeah. And it was just cool. I mean, it was
we're dating both of ourselves right now.
But you know what? It was a great time to be alive, and I stand by it. We had some of the best coming of age movies. We had music. We had an environment where we were still kind of free range teenagers and it was safe to do that.
Yeah.
And I think we all, we grew up in an era where there was still a lot of pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and have some of that kind of development of person and spirit that
we need more of that now. I think.
Yeah. It's changed for this generation. I worry for them a little bit.
Well, Christy, good luck to the election. I think I'm showing my bias with you right now, but you are one of my favorite people.
Thank you.
And I look up to you, and I'm really just impressed with the work that you've done. So I'm really glad you're.
Thanks, Stephen.
Represent our district.
I appreciate it. Thanks for doing what you do. This is an important public service. So thank you.
I appreciate that. So, and we hope you guys enjoyed the talk.
You've been listening to the Talk of Santa Clarita. Listen to us on iTunes, SoundCloud.com, YouTube, and Stitcher. Barring a life event getting in the way, a new podcast is available every Tuesday. Questions, comments, and show ideas can be sent to thetalkofsantaclarita@gmail.com. You can also call or text us at 661-505-8672. That's 661-505-8672. Follow us on Twitter at The Talk of SC or on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube at The Talk of Santa Clarita. You can also visit our website by going to www.thetalkofsantaclarita.com. This has been a production of Radio Free Santa Clarita Incorporated, a 501c3 nonprofit organization. To donate, go to radiofreesantaclarita.org/donate. Radio Free Santa Clarita, on the net and on the air, and we're very much aware.
Any questions?